Promotional graphic for Tiger Talks 4, Dismantling the Culture of Professionalism, with Vu Le and Sandy Ho, part of a series of community conversations with writers and creatives to celebrate Alice Wong's new memoir, Year of the Tiger.
Hello, everyone. My name is Emily Badix, and I am the interim director at the Longmore Institute on Disability at San Francisco State University. I am very pleased to be partnering with the Disability Visibility Project. Ooh, so many words, so many terms, and the Disability and Intersectionality Summit for this event today, our fourth event in our Tiger Talk series. And this one has more registrants than we've ever had for any event before at the Longmore Institute. So that was particularly exciting. Thank you for being here with us. Just a few access notes before we kick our program off. You can access the captioning via the CC button in Zoom, but if you'd like some more customized, slightly more reliable option, we're also offering them on stream text. You can visit tinyurl.com/Longmore captions, and we'll post that in the chat as well. We're using the chat function today only limited to share a few key links with you, but we invite you to use the Q&A box as if it is a chat room, and we'll share that out for folks later if the Q&A space isn't accessible to you during the live program. You can also ask any tech questions you have there or any questions for our panelists. We're keeping the program pretty tight today, so we aren't certain. Maybe we'll have time to get to them, maybe not, we're not sure, but go ahead and ask them. And we've also shared the social media handles for our panelists and invite you to join the online conversation and share your responses there as well with the hashtags, hashtag Tiger Talks and hashtag Year of the Tiger. We will announce our book winners at the end of the program, so stay tuned for that. And with that, it is a pleasure to introduce Sandy Ho. I have been so grateful to work with you, Sandy, on this series. I'm kind of sad that this is our last one for now, but looking forward to doing more things in the spring. And I am really excited that this one you're going to do a more prominent role and be our moderator for today. So thank you so much, Sandy, for all you've done for this series.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Emily. My name is Sandy Ho, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm zooming in today from the land of the Massachusetts people. As an image description of myself, let's first start off with the energy I'm bringing in, which is the Zoom background, is the everything is fine meme. It is a graphic illustration of a room on fire, there's smoke, and then I'm also wearing a unicorn onesie that is gray that has unicorns and rainbows all over it. I have dark wavy hair that has streaks of purple and pink. So, as Emily was saying, it has been a privilege, a joy, and honor to help coordinate some of these Tiger Talk series. In this series, to celebrate Alice Wong's memoir, Year of the Tiger, through community, was unsurprisingly meticulously planned, well in advance by Alice, just like so many of her other work and projects are. Creating, celebrating, and prioritizing community is the disability visibility platform that I know so many of us in the audience and in community have found ourselves in as well. I am not here and never have been here to speak for Alice, but I will share that this series has really been life-giving for her during some of really the most challenging months she's ever had to experience since her stay in the ICU over the summer. And again, I just cannot thank enough my co-partner in this series, Emily, at Longmore Institute, all of the panelists and moderators who continue to throw glitter on Alice's work and also celebrated their own work. I mean, what an incredible time to be a reader of disability justice. And also every single person who has attended this series in the audience. I also want to thank folks who have continued to donate to Alice's ongoing GoFundMe. That has also been another community-led effort so that she can remain at home to continue writing more books and doing all kinds of other projects that we can't wait to share. So that is an ongoing fundraiser, and that link will be shared in the chat. Of course, last but certainly not least, I want to take a moment to thank my dear friend, Tiger sister, comrade, and someone who really has shown me so much heart on the West Coast, the best coast. Alice, thank you so much for trusting me and community with your vision, your words, your fire. I hope that we all came close to what you were imagining this could be. And I know also, excitingly, this is not going to be the last of the community celebration. Finally, if I have learned anything over the past few months, you are a bad bitch who really bring big cat energy to every party and celebration. And just wanted to say we love you so much and we got you. So I also want to now invite guests tonight, Wu Lei. Wu, how have you been? Why don't you introduce yourself? And let's get started.
Hi, everyone. This is Vu. I use he, him pronouns, and I am calling in from Seattle, which is on Duwamish and Coast Salish, Salish land. And I am a mid-age Asian man. I'm looking kind of tired. I couldn't find my unicorn onesie. I had one, and I couldn't find it. But I'm wearing my favorite shirt. Look, it has a golden chanterelle mushroom on it. And I'm wearing Cookie Monster pajama bottoms. So there we go. That's what we're doing. Sarah and I, we were trying to think about not being so professional in the way that we dress, right? So how are you doing, Sandy?
I'm okay. Gotta admit that this is probably gonna be one of my favorite webinars already. I mean, any opportunity to show up in a unicorn onesie and this kind of ragey background. I think, hopefully not coming down with a cold, but I do have a giant cup of tea in my wise ass mug. And yeah, here we are on a Wednesday.
Yay, awesome.
Yeah. How are you?
I'm good. I actually do have a cold, and I've been waking up coughing and hacking. I sound fine, but it's been quite a bit. So yeah, but I'm pretty good. I'm excited about this topic. Lots of people have been kind of, I think over the past several years, people have been talking about professionalism, right? And what it means and so on. So maybe I can start by asking you a question, Sandy, of like how, because I think a lot of people think that I'm very unprofessional. I get accused on LinkedIn and stuff of being unprofessional all the time. What do people accuse you of being unprofessional about? What are some examples?
Well, for starters, I am a millennial, and as such, I'm allergic to phone calls. Like, if you're gonna talk to me over the phone, better not be more than 15 minutes. Please text in advance. And I speak and communicate in memes and emojis. So I have often responded to professional emails, quote unquote professional emails, to quote unquote supposedly bigwig people with a meme and a GIF. And they're like, where's this report at? And I'm like, here's this meme. Like, gather
You're
what.
talking about like funders. You're going to send like a meme to a funder. They're like, how is this program you're going? And you send them like it's fine meme.
Yeah. Everything's fine.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So what about you?
I cuss a lot. I don't know what happened, but over the past 3 years, I've just been swearing all the time on stage, in my writing. And I remember one time, one guy was like, I like what you said, but like you use WTF. Like I literally wrote the initials WTF. He was like, you use WTF, and that's just so like, why did you need to use, like, I can't believe you would say that on a blog, right? And now I'm on stage and I'm like, fuck white supremacy, stuff like that. And people get really, they're like, oh my God, I can't believe he said that, right? So some people consider that to be very unprofessional, like the language that we use. Also, I've just cut down on some of the bullshit. Like I will never write a handwritten thank you note after a job interview or like after getting a grant. Again, I'm just not going to do that, right? I like because that's like a white professional sort of way of doing things. Like you are expected to write a handwritten thank you note because that's a professional thing to do. And for me, I'm just like, why? I mean, has any employer ever wrote me a handwritten thank you note after they interviewed me, after I spent all this time like going to this interview? So I've decided that I think handwritten thank you notes after job interviews, it's complete bullshit, and we need to stop having them.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And that's something that I made very clear to the grantee partners that the Disability Inclusion Fund recently made awards to, that there was never an expectation to publicly like show gratitude or thank to our fund, because the flowers that should be given should be community-led and to disabled-led organization first, instead of me just, doing my bare minimum job is to give people the resources that they need. So, no, the question, the topic of this conversation is professionalism. What do you mean when, the word professionalism comes up? Like, what comes to mind?
I think when we talk about professionalism, it's like how we dress, how we act, and so on, right? What degrees that we have, do we say the right thing at the right time? But what we really mean is like white professionalism. What we really mean, right? White Victorian era professionalism standards. And for many of us who are from marginalized communities, people of color, disabled people, LGBTQIA folks, and so on, I think oftentimes when people say like you're being unprofessional, what they really mean is you are not code switching to white Victorian era professional standards.
Yeah.
Right. What do you think?
Yeah.
What do you think, Chris?
Well, I totally agree. And I think that when we say professionalism, that's really a not so subtle way anymore of saying who gets to belong and who doesn't. And really, in the community that I'm from, as a disabled person, that's often folks who are not palatable in whatever way that they're presenting. There are folks who maybe are nonverbal, are deaf and blind, are neurodivergent, and like the expanse of when it comes to the way professionalism and these ideas and myths resurrect and just keep upholding ableist notions of who gets to thrive in certain sectors is absurd and is complete trash. And yeah, there's nothing but rage for professionalism.
Well, I think about I think about this topic, when I bring it up, like when I bring up the topic of dismantling professionalism, I feel like a lot of people are like, well, what's wrong with professionalism? What's wrong with that? So what's wrong with dressing nice and combing your hair and showering and not cursing and so on, right? And I think in some ways, yeah, sure. But in other ways, I think that we lose a whole bunch of stuff when we are kind of forced to play the sort of performative professionalism that we've been thinking. We lose a lot of things, right? At the beginning of the pandemic, a whole bunch of us were on Zoom meetings. And I remember a whole bunch of people in the beginning just apologizing whenever like their cat jumped on screen or like their kid ran out, screaming and crying or just like snuggling. And they're like, oh, I'm so sorry about my 5-year-old. I'm like, why are we apologizing for our kids or our pets? And I think it's because like professionalism has kind of trained us to think that there's like a professional work self, and then there's like a personal, self where we can actually be our full selves. I feel like we lose this idea of our full selves. We cannot really be our full selves when we are forced into these roles of professionalism, right? Do you feel that?
Yeah, no, especially as somebody who works at a fully remote organization, Borealis Philanthropy, we are staff who are all across the country, and being on Zoom is just one mechanism in which our teams communicate. It's not the only one. But I think that, there is kind of an expectation of being on video, which is not something our organizational culture expects folks to do. But when I had meetings with other folks outside of the organization, it's like, why aren't you on video? What's wrong? Is it like it's such a detraction all of a sudden if folks are participating through the chat? And that when we uphold professionalism, we're losing the joy of even going to work, and we're getting like the humanity of who we are in the work that we do. And like we can't talk about the future of work and productivity without talking about people's relationship to work. I think that's where we should all need to start. And like it already, let's just be frank, like it sucks. And in my opinion, that we already have to schedule and have so much of our day taken up by this idea of productivity and the ableism around that. What if we just create an environment where people can come in as their full selves? And yeah, like, why is that so radical and revolutionary to expect that people will be their best if they can do what they need to do to take care of themselves first?
I think what I have been having an issue with in terms of professionalism is not just the productivity, right? But it's also you must be productive in a certain way, right? For example, I do some of my best work when I'm wearing my pajamas and my hair hasn't been combed in 3 days because I'm not distracted by it, right? Just, maybe I haven't showered because I'm just so focused on my writing or whatever. And I produce some of my best work that way. And I think it when we really focus on like you must perform things a certain type of way, we lose the voices of certain folks, right? And people who can actually do amazing work, we still leave them behind, or we lose a lot of really critical voices. Like in one of Alice's chapters, I really appreciate it. I feel like we don't think about how professionalism affects us in certain ways. Like I think some of it is we're starting to become more aware. For example, Black women getting punished for having their hair a certain way, right? And I think people hopefully are starting to become more cognizant of that. But I also think that there are certain things that we don't think about. Like I never thought until I read Alice's book, for example, about this radio voice and what's considered like a professional voice on the radio, right? Because Alice was talking about, as she started her podcast, that she would interview people. And then she kind of like had this sort of concept of like, well, I don't have like this radio voice. And when you think of someone with a radio voice, you think of someone with, like a smooth voice that's pleasant sounding, that it has an even cadence and so on, right? But for many disabled people, maybe someone who uses a ventilator, that is more challenging. Their voices may not be what people expect to hear from the radio. And so we lose out on these very important voices here. So we're not actually being very productive in some ways, right?
Yeah. I wanted to point to one of the chapters in Alice's book, Tiger Tips for Interviewing, which I think, first of all, every journalist everywhere and every hiring manager everywhere needs to read and incorporate that somehow into your processes. But the sentence that I'll just read here is, the interview is not a time for you to give your opinion or dominate. This is their time, and you are facilitating a vibe where they feel safe to share. How incredible would it be if that was a vibe for a job interview, for a presentation? I have a friend who will remain anonymous, who's currently a PhD student. And this friend texted me the other day being like, they're in this class and a guest presenter from a media communication team was having them do activities and exercises around presenting their like research dissertation topics in like 10 seconds, 25 seconds, and 30 seconds. And I just like went off. So I thought that was just such a poor use of, first of all, student time. And also, why are we training students or just anybody in any sector to talk about their areas of work in 30 seconds? Like in this age of emails and editing, and I don't know about you, Vu, but I don't communicate through carrier pigeon. Like, I'm not so concerned about these 30 seconds where this bird might fucking fly away, because I know that email of just being like, oh, why don't we follow up and have a conversation? Having communication around that's more about relationship building than 30 seconds to jam this abstract down somebody's throat seemed a little bit more useful and a better way to also fully show up as ourselves. Anyways, I just kind of went off on a tangent, which we all knew was going to happen.
No,
So
it's good. I think just to pick up on the topic that you had, which is about hiring, right? There's a lot of sort of professional standards around hiring that, again, is from white Victorian era stuff, like the handwritten thank you notes, the way that we must dress with the ties and whatever, the suits and so on, right? And over time, I think it really does consolidate power into the hands of an employer. I think professionalism has been a tool that has been used to concentrate power in the hands of employers, for example, right? I don't see employers being told that they need to write handwritten thank you notes for employees or potential employees, right? And they've always been told, employees have always been told, be grateful that you even had an opportunity to do this. You need to be professional so you can be taken seriously. And that has been weaponized to consolidate power. And I think that has been really terrible. And it manifests in different ways in our sector besides just hiring as well. It manifests in fundraising, for example. We wonder why, for example, in fundraising, nonprofit fundraising, so many donors are white, so many fundraisers are white. And it's probably because we're using white professional standards to fundraise. For example, I get into trouble again with the handwritten thank you note. People why don't you write handwritten thank you notes to all your donors and etc. First of all, okay, why? Well, who decided that was a standard? Also, for some cultures, such as Vietnamese culture, where I'm from, we don't write handwritten thank you notes. That's really not how we thank people. We thank people usually with food. And that in some ways is much better, right? But so we take someone who's in a different culture, force them to be well, this is how white people do this, and go ahead and do that. And then we're going to punish them. They may not get a job. And then we wonder why we don't have enough fundraisers of color in the sector.
speaking of alternative ways to both share information and give thanks and just communicate in general, one thing that both you and Alice, I think, share in your writing through your blog and newsletter, Nonprofit AF, and she writes about how procrastination is a part of her writing process. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, I love Alice's book because I think in some ways we operate the same ways, right? We write a certain way. I procrastinate all the time. I think that if anyone, I feel what professionalism does to us is it kind of lets people see only one aspect of us, right? For example, the screen here, it looks very well put together. I have some unicorns in here and they're standing over here, and I got some plants. It looks very pleasant. But look at this. It's a mess over here. I have not cleaned my room in ages. It's terrible. So people don't see this. And the same thing with the writing. People only see the end product of this blog post. But if they saw my writing process, they would think that would be extremely unprofessional. I wait until the very last minute. I don't outline anything. I start feeling the panic at 9 p.m. because my blog is due, at midnight or so. I need to publish and then go to bed. And so by the evening, I'm just freaking out. And someone who may not know my process be like, that is really unprofessional. But the reality is that I have not missed a blog, and some of them are really good. And I'm proud of what I've done. But if you think about it, maybe this is not very professional. Also, I don't do any editing, really. I publish and then I wake up at 6 o'clock sort of freaking out, thinking that I need to do some editing, which is also very unprofessional. And so if we focus on what's professional, then we may not realize that, hey, this is actually works for this guy. And I think it works for Alice. She talks a lot about procrastination. What works for you? What can allow you to do your best work? And maybe professionalism doesn't do that.
Yeah. And I think that thinking back to like my earlier school assignments and things, I was always that student who was annoyingly just kind of snarky back to the teachers who would ask me about my outline part of the writing. And I'd be like, I already did the work in my head, right? Like we hear that from students in more of the math and sciences. And sometimes that gets, I think, unfairly rewarded in academia, but I think the expectation of training people to do things in a certain way, the 5-paragraph essay format, the outlining, the drafting, and also like why is it that the final report is the only thing supposedly that in this example funders, for instance, would review to consider like whether or not a project gets renewed or gets another grant. And what are we doing by minimizing and forcing organizations to pool all of their kind of accomplishments and how they measure their own success into these made up benchmarks and whatever into a written report, when in this time, I think that outreach is measured through TikToks and Instagram and Twitter, and all kinds of other community-led conversations and discussions, rather than just a blanket report.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up funding, because I feel like professionalism has been used against communities quite frequently in philanthropy. We have a system where the people who can basically write the best grant proposals get the funding, right? And they can say a certain words right, or certain phrases, and answer questions in a particular way on site visits, then they are the ones who tend to get funding. And this is one of the reasons I believe that is why 90% of philanthropic dollars go to white-led organizations, because in many ways, right, funders tend to be white, board foundation trustees tend to be white, and so they expect, and you tend to gravitate towards people who speak, who talk and act like you. And so you kind of create this sort of cycle where people who look and act like you, who are mostly going to be white-led organizations, they play this game that you create using white professional standards of writing and sounding a certain way. And that's why we have like so much inequity. That's one of the reasons why we have so much inequity in philanthropy.
Yeah, I think so. I am just finishing my first year as the director of the Disability Inclusion Fund, and not come into this role with any kind of sense of development or grant writing. Never took a class on grant writing. And one of the first strategies that we talked with our team about and that we saw within the disability community was, since that folks are burnt out, many who are disabled led and BIPOC disabled led are stretched thin. I mean, we don't need to rehash all of the trauma. Just look around. The COVID pandemic is still ongoing. The like shit, like political environment that we've been in, and the need for joy and rest is not something that I think many funders are thinking about when they're saying, like, we want to fund bold and innovative ideas. Oftentimes, I think the most bold and innovative and revolutionary are not actually that. Maybe it sounds like that because not enough folks are talking about it. But we started this Joy Grant strategy. And as I was fundraising for the Joy Grants, a lot of the donors I was talking to was like, well, how are you going to measure joy? And how are you going to sustain it? I'm like, that is literally the opposite of what we're doing. Get on the same page here. Why are we measuring joy? What do you mean sustain it? It's just there. Like, we need to just support what exists. And like, unsurprising to anybody here, those Joy Grants have been incredibly helpful. And we continue to learn from our grantee partners about why and how joy is a disability justice movement strategy. Thinking to this point around professionalism, it's also about making spaces for marginalized folks to be safe and in their like employment environment. I know that for many in philanthropy and in other sectors too, disclosing disability status is not safe. There's a lot of stigma and attitudes around it, right? Biases. And I think getting to your earlier question about what do we lose when we uphold professionalism, it's like we are actively discriminating against an entire community of people.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what do we do about this? And someone in the Q&A was like, okay, it seems like we need to redefine what professionalism means. And I think I agree in some ways. And I also think that we need to kind of sort of imagine the concept of professionalism. Like what do we mean by professionalism? Why is it necessary? Right? Because it's really still very much tied to capitalistic structures and productivity, like you said, Sandy, right? Of like you can be professional so that you can get the most productivity, so you can help the economy and advance capitalism. It's basically what professionalism has been about. What I really appreciate about Alice's book, besides that it's hilarious and thought-provoking, is that at the end she paints this sort of picture of like, look, let's just reimagine what our society could be like. We can ground it in disabled people who have been saying like, listen to us, we've gone through this shit, and let's reimagine a world that is better and more accessible and better for everyone. I really appreciate that. So like let's reimagine what it means to be professionalism. Maybe it's not even professionalism. Like, do we, I feel like we need to get shit done. Sure, right? We need to work, we need to get shit done. But do we need to work so much? Do we need to be productive all the time? I wrote a blog post about toxic productivity, about how so many of us can't even we just work and work until we basically die, right? And then we pass it on to our kids. Like in the very beginning, we asked them like, what are you going to be when you grow up at the age of 4 or 5? Like I've had to resist asking my kids this. I don't want them to think about like, what is your profession? What are you going to do? How are you going to contribute to the economy when you grow up? I just want them to just be. I want them to be happy. They can be whatever, Hopefully they'll be a writer like their dad. I don't know. But otherwise, I just want them to be happy. But we've been so trained to just think about the economy so much. And I wanted to reimagine that. I don't know. I've been talking a lot.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree. And I think one of the other learnings that I have had from Alice's friendship and like our organizing together, and in her memoir, when she includes her wish list of things that she wants to still accomplish because she's not done, right? And she names the things that she wants for herself as an individual. Like we all are aware of her contributions, the infinite number of them to community, but also prioritizing ourselves should not be a shameful or negative thing. And I think, like, for example, I'm just gonna go on record and publicly say this. Bay Area Scoop Shop, Humphrey Slocum Ice Cream. Your people should probably connect with Alice's people because she wants an ice cream flavor named after her. So make that happen. But also, I think that some of the things that you were just talking about is philanthropy and funders and this idea of professionalism getting in our own way, when really we just need to just take a breather for a moment. And that's saying a lot as somebody who is ADHD and neurodivergent and just wants shit done yesterday. But at the same time, it's okay if we're not going to make that deadline because we will probably communicate it. And let's also be real that there are other things more important in our lives than maybe the deliverables and the work. And I think that's one of the takeaways that I got from Year of the Tiger as well.
Yeah, I love that. I love that Alice wants an ice cream flavor named after her. She's hilarious, actually. That chapter was cracking me up because she's listing all sorts of things that she wants, right? like being a character on Star Trek or Star Wars, someone who uses a wheelchair. We don't see those characters in Star Trek or Star Wars. And the erasure of disabled people in many science fiction, that's something that was really eye-opening for me, because I did not really think a lot about that. And I really appreciate Alice pointing that out, right? But while she's talking about some very important stuff, like at the end of her list of things she wanted, as on her bucket list, it's like, she's like, 2 words, ghost sex. And I was like, what the fuck? I was cracking up because, like, I love that she's able to infuse humor and cussing and dirty jokes and stuff into this book that is also very helpful in shaping my thought and other thoughts that people need to pay attention to. And yet she does it in a way that I think a lot of people who have been trained in the sort of traditional thinking of professional would be like, wow, this book is so unprofessional. She cusses all the time. She talks about ghost sex and right. And I love this. And I feel like this might like a way for us to think about professionalism. Like, this is an amazing book, right?
Yeah.
Is it, it might not be professional in the way that some pearl clutchers might think of as professional, but it has been a joyful read. It allows me to see Alice a bit of who she is. And that is really amazing and so wonderful. So I think maybe this is kind of what we talk about, of redefining professionalism. I like Anusha's definition of like being effective while working in a way that is respectful of others, that also takes equity into account, right? That is really important. We haven't really been taking equity into account when we talk about professionalism, right? Also, working to only get a task done, not busy work to appear productive. I appreciate that. I appreciate that this is kind of what we start to think about. Like, I want us to be whole. I want us to enjoy work. I want us to not have to work so much, So redefining professionalism, I think is cool for us to think about.
Yeah. So then I think that gets us to our next part of the discussion, which is, where do we go from here, and what can the folks start to do now?
I don't know. I think we had to unlearn a bunch of stuff, right? We've been taught since a very young age, like, this is what it means to be professional. You must do things a certain way. You must dress a certain way. You must say things a certain way, and so on. And we don't think about how over time this has really conditioned us to think a certain way, right? And going back again to like the folks apologizing because their kids appeared on a Zoom meeting. I'm like, you're at home. This is your house. Why would you apologize for your kids appearing in a house where your work has taken over your personal dwelling now, and yet you're being asked to apologize? You think that you have to apologize for it? So I think we gotta like unlearn a whole bunch of stuff that we were taught, that we've internalized as professional. So yeah, what do you think, Sandy?
Yeah, I agree. And I also think about the folks who are the ones who are often most expected to uphold or abide by these kind of made up phony professionalism standards are oftentimes also the people who are in our team that have the least voice or power in our organizations too. And thinking about ways that we can, instead of putting the responsibility or the burden or the expectation for systemic change in an organization, right, leading the DEI like banner and the charge should not be on, for example, maybe one Black disabled person, woman often, then in the organization. But when we also come to this idea of professionalism as a organizing call for solidarity, I think also starts to change the conversation too.
That'll be helpful. And I think sometimes when we talk about things, people's instinct is to be like, so what you mean is that you're not going to get any work done? Is that it? You're just going to wear your pajamas to work and then just laze around and eat bonbons and cuss at people? Is that what you mean now? And that's really not what I mean, right? I feel like for a lot of folks who are who are disabled, who are neurodivergent, for example, in some ways, removing some of these professional standards mean that we can get some of our best work done, right? And in the most joyful way. When I started working I remember when I had a practicum in college where, I was expected, like, you need to dress up, you need to wear button-down shirts and so on, because this is a large organization and we have important board members, and especially on board meeting days, like, all of us were like tense because, like, maybe we didn't dress up well enough and so on, right? And we were all students, so like we couldn't really afford ties and all this stuff. So I tried the best that I could, trying to get the least stained button-down shirt that I could, right? But as I started developing my career and I had more of a privilege to choose where I can work, and I became executive director, I'm like, I don't care what you wear. Like, like really, you can wear a t-shirt and jeans every day. I don't care. You can wear them meeting donors. I do not care. Because at the end of it, like, this is you. And like, are you working? Are you getting stuff done? Is it high quality? Is it helping advance our mission? And what I find is that when people are able to be their full selves, oftentimes they're able to do some of the most joyful and effective work.
Yeah, no, totally. My partner often makes fun of me because probably most of my shirts in my closet are either something with a unicorn, a rainbow, or it's an activist shirt, like one of those free shirts that you get from a nonprofit or at a conference. And it's like, yeah, that's just how I'm going to show up to whatever it is. I probably only actually just got my first real quote unquote blazer when I started this job because I thought I needed to. Wrong, by the way. And the other thing that I would add to this is when we strategize collectively to dismantle professionalism, we're also, I think, able to get to systemic, like, and to address problems and tension better within an organization, because it allows people to actually have a conversation, right, that is not going to be bullshit or shady, or like, can we just learn to have more direct communication with one another in the least harmful way as possible, instead of trying to be worried about, oh, what's so-and-so going to think, or what is my supervisor going to think if I raise this issue. But when we allow for openness and for also, I think this is a strength of neurodivergency, is also like creativity in how we address tension and solutions to problems too.
Yeah, thanks, Sandy. We have quite a bit of questions in the Q&A, so I thought, do you want? Should we try to answer some of these?
Yeah, sure. So we have a few minutes. Why don't you go for it and choose a question?
Yeah, let me see. I mean, there's tons of really amazing questions, everyone, and we really appreciate them. And apologies that we can't get to everything. Although I don't know, maybe we need to stop apologizing for everything. Maybe that's another sort of professional thing where I'm like, there is no way we could get to every single amazing question on here, right? And why are we apologizing? I think we should just acknowledge it, right? So, like a question someone asked, an anonymous attendee asked, would love to hear your thoughts on immunocompromised people having to navigate the mandatory in-person office migration. I don't find it very professional to be around coworkers that are maskless. Yeah, and kind of going back again into this, like, who does the professionalism leave out, right? When we talk about professionalism, is like, we think that it maybe some people, some traditional people think, well, going back to the office and being present in the office, that is professional, being on time and present and so on. Well, we're leaving behind maybe immunocompromised people who could be jeopardizing their lives by being there. And that does not seem professional. That seems that seems unethical, really, right? Yeah. And something that's unethical can't really be professional.
Yeah, no, and I think, what I'm thinking about right now in response to that question is, what if the reframing of professionalism is access, right? Creating more access and I'm not just talking about like accessibility and accommodation, but making the workplace more accessible to folks can be the starting place for how we reconstruct this idea of professionalism.
Yeah. Sorry, Sandy. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No. So I think that as our society is increasingly and very disturbingly itching for whatever reason to return to this quote unquote idea of normalcy, as RSV, flu, and COVID are on the rise, we're really just screwing ourselves over. And it's probably knock it off. And also, this idea of returning to normalcy or professionalism is just not helping us.
Yeah, well, Alice has several pieces about sort of not returning to normal, because the normal that we had in the past pre-pandemic is very ableist and inequitable, right? And yet so many of us are clamoring to go back to it. I feel like in some ways, this sort of normality or this sort of professionalism allows us this sense of like security. It allows us to feel secure. Like if everyone looks a certain way or acts a certain way, then there's less for us to worry about. And that's not necessarily true. I think it's distracting us from what is really important, which is equity and all of, and all of this other stuff we need to be paying attention to more often. So, all right, we can go on that, but I see Jenna's question, which is, I am a faculty for a health professions program, and our accreditation standards require us to monitor and assess students' professional behaviors. We will be out of compliance with our accreditors if we don't surveil professionalism. What do you recommend in this case? And what I would probably say is, like, we need to do a much better job organizing. What I love about Alice and the many examples of her activism is, like, she was constantly writing letters, organizing other people to do things. And I feel like we haven't really done enough of that. I feel like we've developed this sort of learned helplessness in some ways, oftentimes, where we're just like, what can we do? I talk to, for example, people who have government funders who require ridiculous things. And people are like, well, it's the government, what can we possibly do? It's the government. They're just always going to be terrible and burdensome. And I remember one time my organization actually went to the county and told them, like, your grant proposal is way too burdensome. And we heard it from multiple people. And like, you requiring a quarterly report for a grant is ridiculous. You may be the government, but this doesn't make any sense. And they changed the reporting requirement. So what I would say is, like, we need to organize and maybe not assume that things are a given and they are immutable and we can't change them. If this is an equity issue, then what I would advise Jenna and others is to organize and actually get some students to say, look, this is actually inequitable, because when you're forcing these professional standards of how students should dress and so on, it leaves behind disabled students or neurodivergent students or Black students or Indigenous students and so on, who may not be able to conform for various different reasons, and they shouldn't have to. So I think we need to organize a bit more when we can.
Yeah, agreed. And I think funders then should fund more organizing. Yeah.
Yes.
Like, let's get out of these ideas of, and I think the other part of professionalism culture, and specifically white professionalism culture, is the assumption that funders have all the answers and solutions and strategies, and we know what should happen, and that's the least of the case. And so funders funding more organizing that is movement-led, disabled and BIPOC-led, that would also be shifting the inequity that's happening.
Yeah, and I think about, like, can equity exist with this sort of the way that we define have been defining professionalism, right? And I think in certain cases it's very challenging for it to. And some funders, if they really want to be equitable, then they need to, like, remove some of these professional standards that they have been adhering to. Like, whoever writes the best grant applications, whoever can show up and and dress, most professionally on a site visit. Whoever can write the best logic model or whatever, and answer without stuttering, and being charming and charismatic and extroverted and so on, right? That are the markers of professionalism. It's been leaving a lot of people behind. I know that we're wrapping up here, but I maybe what we can end on a, like a hopeful note. Like I really appreciate Alice like ending of her book, which is about the future, and she's very creative. Like she talks about being an oracle, and she's speaking to us from the year 2029, and she's like, oh, look at all these ridiculous humans back during the pandemic era when they just totally fucked things up, and they didn't listen to disabled people. They were focused on ridiculous things like professionalism and getting back to work and all this stuff, and that's ridiculous. And and I'm glad. So I appreciate that sort of framing of like, what does it look like in the future? I think in the future, what does professionalism look like in the future? I would love for us to not have to work so much, because productivity is tied to professionalism, and we have to work 50, 40 hours even. Like, do we need to work 40 hours? And I would like work to be joyful. Some of the best work I've done, for example, was like having these community gatherings, right? Where we discuss our values and our strategies, but we always had interpreters, we had food, we had childcare, we paid childcare providers so that parents, community members can actually bring their kids. And there were kids who were running around screaming and playing. And I loved it. I loved it because it looked and felt like a community that we were working towards and we were working for. And it was some of the most joyful work. And I want us to get into that space where it's okay that we don't have to apologize for our children, for our human challenges that we are experiencing, that we can be fully human. And I think that should be, like the new sort of standard for professionalism.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that I can follow up with like after that, but I would just underscore that in the future, I'm hopeful that also when we are talking about professionalism, we are also considering the individual as much as what the organization is trying to get to in its own mission and work. I think the more that we are supporting, especially disabled, BIPOC, queer, trans, and femme, in their own professional trajectory. It's like, first of all, your trajectory is whatever the hell it's going to be. And I've learned that, and I'm continuing to learn that, in the ways that, movement is not linear. Career and professionalism should definitely not be linear, and that it's not. And that's fine. That is also a value. The disability justice principle that every person has value and should be considered as in their whole is really important, and I think is a good reminder for all of us. Vu, thank you so much for this conversation. I wish it could go on forever. Hopefully some of these questions that didn't get answered can become future blog post ideas for you.
Oh, there's plenty here, but I gotta watch some more Netflix first. I'm procrastinating. So like next week's blog post I've not started. We'll see. But thank you so much, Sandy.
It's only Wednesday, like please.
You're right. It is only Wednesday. Yes.
Well, thank you also to our audience tonight. And I am going to now transition us into the book giveaways. So we are giving away several copies of Alice's book. And I also want to give a heads up to the audience that the collaboration between Longboard Institute, Disability Visibility Project, and the Disability and Intersectionality Summit will be putting together some spring programs, so stay tuned for that. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to Nonprofit AF, Vu's newsletter. It's fucking hilarious. And it'll give you plenty of talking points to your next board meeting. So for the winners of Alice's book giveaway for tonight, we have. I'm going to read the names on the screen, and I am sincerely sorry that I'm going to stumble and butcher some of these names. So we have Anne Romatowski, Corey Stow, Jeff Jackson, Kate Zeller, Mary Jo Halder, Sarah Ganderup, Zoe Coyle, Savannah Weber, Nancy Yang, and Karen Williams. And so to claim your book, please click on the link that's in the chat, which is tinyurl.com/Tiger Talk winner. That is the form where you'll input the format of the book that you would prefer and other information so that the Longmore folks can get the book to you. Thank you so much, everyone. And this recording of tonight's webinar will be processed with the captions and the transcription. So the recording will be available in a few weeks. In the meantime, please stay safe, mask the fuck up, please, and stay unprofessional. That is it. Okay. Thank you,
Thanks,
Boo.
Sandy. Thank you, everyone. Happy holidays. Get some rest.
Bye.
Hey.